Hello, welcome to On Second Thought with Mike and Luke, an ongoing conversation about ideas and current events in which we explore the underlying connections and root causes that help us discover what is really true and can even help reshape the focus of our lives. Let's see, today we're going to discuss a little bit about the Garden of Eden, a little bit about LGB without the T, and we'll probably touch on a few other things. So let's think again.
All right.
Any words, anything from last time we talked that struck you that you want to, before we jump into new stuff, anything?
Well, so a while back we were talking about politics, and I was trying to
Okay.
explain this big complicated framework that I've developed
Yes, that episode.
where I'm trying to see more clearly how politics in America at least is working right now. And I remembered something that I didn't mention that time, a saying that I heard somewhere and stole and adapted a little bit to myself. And it goes something like this, okay? That with my wife, I'm a communist, that we share everything, right? To each according to their need. And then with my sons, I'm a socialist, so I help them as needed, but I expect them to work too, right? But I control the means of production.
Mm-hmm.
And then with my community, we live in a small town. I'm very liberal and want the community to, you might say tax and spend. I want our town to benefit, and I want to live in a town that's.
You're even willing to pay taxes
I'm willing to
for
pay
your local town. You walk on those sidewalks.
We're hoping to be like improve our city hall, from the
Yeah.
sad cinder block building that it is to
Yeah.
something that
Yeah.
is worth the history that our town has.
Because you can see the money. If you pay
That's
taxes,
right.
you get to see it.
It comes back to us. So then with my state, I'm a conservative, and the minimum is probably the best, and I would love to undermine some of the big statewide mandates, especially on education, which is my background.
Yeah.
And then with the federal government, I'm pretty much a libertarian, right? Leave me alone, and
Defense.
keep the borders and the commies out, and let us live. So
Yeah, that's interesting. You said this, and I heard you say this before. And my first time I pushed back on the communists just because of the forced labor issue, or you never get to the communist. It's not a marriage. You enter it freely. You don't enter communism freely.
These days,
that's true. Did it ever enter it freely? Did anyone ever enter it freely?
yeah.
One party did. But as I reflected on it, I thought, that's not actually bad if you take the idea that once you say yes to the marriage, you're kind of locked in, even if you argue. If you take the whole thing about till death do us part and we're going to make this work no matter what kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Then in a sense you are kind of forced to it. There may be times in which you don't really like what's going on, but you said, I made the commitment to this. And in a sense, it is kind of communistic then.
Yeah.
Everything equally belongs to each other no matter what.
Well, and I would say that
Like it or not.
no matter what, within a couple years even, the spouse you have is not the spouse you married. It doesn't take that long for that to change.
Yeah.
And now you're at a point where you're making a commitment to not just the person you have, but the person you will have, the person you did have.
Yeah.
And all that's an interesting dance.
That's true. I had somebody, a boyfriend of one of our kids say, so our oldest is expecting their first child, and they said, "What do you think about being a grandparent?" And then they said, "Do you think they're ready?" Our oldest, do you think they're ready for kids? And you think to yourself, what do you tell this 21-year-old? And I said, no, but nobody is. The two biggest things you'll ever face in your life are when you get married and you realize how selfish you are. You won't believe it. And then you have kids and you think, wow, I was even more selfish than I thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's those are two big things, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good saying.
You had some questions about Trump?
Oh yeah, let's ask those.
Can he win? Will he get nominated? All this stuff?
So these are quick questions. These are quick fire.
Yeah,
Somebody calls
yeah.
them quick fire somewhere. And I've actually asked you and your wife these at least 2 times in the last maybe 2 years. Okay, so I call them the 3 questions. And it's been interesting to ask this across my relationships over a period of a couple years. First question is this. Is Trump going to run? Well, he said he's going to. But now my question is adjusted. Do you think he's really running, given some of the things that have taken place that he's done recently?
Right.
Do you think he's really running? The NFTs one, that's an interesting thing.
Well, it was a fundraiser, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was odd.
Yeah. I saw a bunch of people mocking, because the people who bought those, right, are probably people who don't quite understand what NFTs are. So they were sort of
that's one
saying,
them.
well, where do I get my trading card? When does it arrive?
I know that's one of the possibilities. The other is that it's all a way of getting around the donation caps for giving.
Well, or is there caps on who can give or what it can be
as
used
an individual. No, as an individual, you have only so much money that you can give. That's why the other stuff is called dark money.
for? Okay.
But
And that's where it goes to super PACs and things like that.
yeah, and there's other ways to raise. That's why they do fundraisers with dinner plates. There's no
Right.
limit on buying a $10,000 dinner plate.
Right.
But this was a thing, they didn't even have to host the dinner. I don't know why, but it's just weird. Okay.
Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
Do you think he's really running?
I do. I just think he's tired.
Personally,
and I think
your opinion here.
Even when he ran the first time, he had a lot more support from some inner circle people. He doesn't seem to have now. So I don't think his family's on board completely.
That inner circle. Yes, I noticed that.
I know a lot of the people who supported him along the way have bowed out or gotten burned or given up.
Yeah.
So
okay, so how does that affect your that plays into is he really running question too, because he's got to know that, right?
yeah,
His support there was a really big cheerleading team the first time around,
yeah,
and the second when he lost or was stolen, one of the two, there was a big cheerleading team too.
there was. Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, if I was in his camp, I would be advising him to hold back until he's got someone, because his strongest point is when he's, chanting "lock her up." Like he needs someone to insult, someone to fight against.
He doesn't have a defined enemy,
so that he's kind of the underdog, and he doesn't.
whether it's
attacking Joe Biden
or the California governor.
Because
He doesn't.
And so his only opponent right now is DeSantis, maybe.
Yeah.
But DeSantis is making super minimal moves. He's running Florida, so I think he's
maybe the
biding his
best
time.
move at this point. If he's running, if he wants to run, his best move is to be quiet about it all.
I would think, yeah.
At this point, okay. For a long time, I was saying I didn't think he was going to run. Actually, even though most of my friends thought he was, I thought Melania is going to say we don't want to do this. She did say before we had a great life.
I don't think Melania has anything to say about it, to be honest.
Literally, you think that?
I think she has zero sway over him in his life.
That is a possibility.
Yeah.
It would be.
I saw an interview with him where it was like Letterman or something, way back when.
Yeah.
And asking him, does he change diapers?
Yeah.
Because Melania just had Barron.
Yeah.
And it was like a joke to him. Like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even part of his life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd go that far. I think she's still they're still married. Maybe it's a matter of convenience.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Okay, second question.
All right.
If he's running, he says he is, and if he is really running, do you think he'll receive the nomination?
If he's running, will he receive the nomination?
I mean, let's assume he is running, and it's
yeah.
real.
Let's say he goes for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can he receive the nomination? Will he receive the nomination?
If DeSantis really came out swinging, I think he could take him down. And so maybe it's a 50-50.
You think Trump could take DeSantis down?
No. I think
you
DeSantis could take down Trump. Because Trump's biggest weakness is the vaccines. And he won't let them go.
We've had some of this conversation in the last few days, and that didn't come up, but that is totally, I agree with that completely.
Even this week, he went on a podcast, and they asked him about the vaccines. And he was saying, maybe it saved 100 million lives.
Yeah, I know. Gosh. It's one of those ones where he's out of sync with his base. The base that loves him does not agree with that.
Well, and we saw this we were talking about the Speaker of the House fight. Mm-hmm. And those people who fought were against him, even though they represent his base.
Yeah.
Gates and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert and those people.
Yeah.
They're Trump people.
Right.
And Trump wouldn't go with them.
Right.
So he's losing. He's losing touch. Maybe, I don't know.
Or some of the honeymoon element. I mean, I'm sure in one sense the honeymoon from his first administration was gone very quickly with Russiagate and all that was happening. But there's another sense in which you're married to somebody that's not the same person.
Right.
You might still support him, but it's still not the same person, right?
Yeah.
So I had thought for a long time that he would absolutely receive the nomination if he ran, even though I didn't think he was going to. But now I'm not so sure.
Right.
Now I'm not so sure if he would. Things have changed. Okay, last question then. Can he win? Okay, so he runs.
Yeah.
Let's say he gets the nomination, and let's say the question is not if he's bloodied up by DeSantis, can he still win? Let's say he takes it easily. Let's say DeSantis doesn't even run.
Sure.
Okay, and it's his. He takes it. Can he win then in an election in 2024?
No.
Okay, now I have to separate the question.
Okay.
I don't know which one you're saying no to. There's the winning and getting the most legal votes, and then there's winning and ending up in the White House, and they're not the same thing. At least in my opinion,
Only
they're no
one of them
longer the
matters,
same.
though.
What do you mean?
At this point, if you're not in the White House, you didn't win.
Okay.
Because we know what we're up against.
Okay,
We know
would
what's
you divide
going
your
on.
answer then? Do you think he can get the most legal votes but lose
There's
it
no way to
to
know.
cheating? Okay.
Like,
You're
how
right.
would you even
There's
know how many
technically-
votes he got?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, nobody knows in the last one, but
That's right.
it seems to me, I think it was a landslide. I think it was a landslide the last one. He was he was winning going into, okay, so I wasn't meant, the conversation not meant to be about was there cheating or not, but I think it was.
Clearly, yeah.
And I went to bed at 2 a.m, and he's up in the swing states, and he has won this thing. And it's clear there's been a lot of shenanigans going on for at least 3 or 4 or 5 months, and he still won.
So were you awake when they stopped counting? When they were-
Yes, when they stopped and went to bed. That's when I went to bed.
Yeah, yeah.
And then woke up, and 100,000 votes in all these strategic places overnight switched.
Right.
It was very upsetting. But the point is, I think he did win in I think it was a landslide.
Well, even if
He
you
had
look
the
at
most votes that's ever had in a presidential ever.
yeah, I mean, if you look at how many votes Biden would have had to have gotten more votes than Obama ever got.
And that's just
The most
I know
underwhelming
the
candidacy
left
ever.
is going to say, well, that's what happened. It's like, that's stupid. I don't like Obama or Biden, but Obama was a way better politician than
So
Biden.
the people I know who think that Trump lost legitimately would say that no one voted for Biden. They just voted for not Trump.
And I'm sure there's a percent that's accurate about.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah. So my thing on that is, can he win? For a while I was saying yes, he can win the most votes. No, he can't win against cheating because they haven't figured it out yet. And 2022 proves it. So in my opinion,
How old is he going to be?
okay, goes back to, is he going to run? I was saying no from the start until he said he was, because he's going to be 78, I think, when he runs.
Something.
And he'd be 82 at the end of a second term.
Yeah.
And I just think, Biden, if you remember when Trump first started, Biden was cogent. I mean, he's always been a stick your foot in the mouth kind of guy.
Yeah.
But talkers often are. And so I never really held that against him too much. It didn't bother me. But began to be a decline, and then it's so fast.
Yeah.
When you get old, the decline, once it hits, it can be 6 months.
Yeah.
And you got
You're
dementia, man.
incapacitated, right?
And I think that Trump would hate that more than anything, to be in power, but to lose his senility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's what Biden is. He is not a senile man. He's not all there.
Wait, he's not a senile. He is a senile.
He is a senile.
Yeah,
He's
yeah.
not.
No, I'm with you.
He's not sane. He doesn't have his wits about him.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, there's the 3 questions. Well, we'll see a year from now what you think about him again. Alexander the Great. You want to talk about Alexander
Yeah.
the Great? I'm thinking, like, I wonder what that's about.
Well,
I really don't know.
I was thinking about the temptations of Christ
Okay.
and Satan offering to Jesus all of the kingdoms of the world.
Okay.
And it feels in my reading of that story, it's always felt like a hypothetical temptation, right?
Yes, I see what you're saying.
A temptation, probably to me hypothetical, because there has been 0 opportunities for me to conquer the earth,
Right.
or maybe there's been lots and I've never taken them, right? But it's never been a temptation,
Yeah.
and so it doesn't feel real.
So it was always a fake question if it was presented to you. A
Sure,
hypothetical.
Sure. Well, and it also felt like it was a hypothetical in the sense that Satan is offering it, but does he really have it to offer?
Okay.
But the more I've been studying recently, sort of these deep history of the oldest parts of the Bible, the more clarity I think I'm getting around what are these principalities and powers and this spiritual war that the Bible describes that we're in, and that in fact they do, like he is offering. He could have said, "Yeah, we'll conquer
Yeah.
the world."
Yeah.
Jesus could have conquered the earth.
I think it
He
was a
could have
real
ruled
offer.
it, right?
Yeah.
And there was a lot of prophecy in the Old Testament that he would,
Well, yeah.
which is
The
fascinating to think
Redeemer's
about,
going to
right?
come and sit on his Father's throne,
And when you
the
look at
nations go to him?
Jesus' ministry, he's using political language all throughout his preaching, and even his closest friends think
Well,
he's going to.
Wait, when you say that, what I hear you saying is he's using language like kingdom.
Correct.
Things that
But if
it was natural to understand in the political sphere, even if we learned later he had another meaning to
correct.
it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Even to the point when he was resurrected, his follower says, "Are we now going
After 3.5
conquer?
years.
Are we going to start a fight?
That's
Here we
right.
go."
That's right.
And but he's hinting at it. Even the way he calls his followers, the group of his followers, the church. And this word church is like what we would say Congress. It's an assembly of people called out to decide matters for the state, for the, maybe the city state at that point. It has a political undertone. So when he comes in on Palm Sunday and it's his followers singing Hosanna,
Yeah.
the Son of David, right?
Yeah. The king.
The king is here. He's arrived at the capital.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was thinking about that temptation is what people like Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, they did fall for
World
that.
conquer is what
They
you're saying.
thought, I'm going to conquer the whole world. I'm going to be the greatest that ever was. And it tied into me with that idea of that you have been thinking about, the Garden of Eden. And this idea you can be like God without God. I'm going to be like God, independent of who God is or submitting to him.
Yeah.
Which is funny or sad because God wants us to be like him, but we just don't get to be him. Yeah.
To throw a wrinkle in it that we haven't discussed, which is probably stupid
That's
to
why
do.
we're here. Do it.
I know. Okay, Elohim. The word there is Elohim.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you're aware Elohim has a double meaning.
Okay.
The meaning one is it's a genre. Elohim means the gods. It
Right.
means it's a category,
The council of
and that's
heaven.
what would make up the council of the heavens. Would
Yeah.
the divine council would be made up of the Elohim,
Right.
which are created beings, except for the one uncreated.
Yeah. I
But
think
the
Michael
rest-
Heiser calls God species unique among the council of the gods.
Yes, that's right. But the word Elohim is used of these created beings.
Yeah.
So, what we have in fact, I'm not sure if you realize, even in the Genesis 3 passage, or the 2 passage, no, 3, when it says, let us,
Let us make man in our image.
no, you will, the temptation, the serpent comes and says, when you eat it, God knows that you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Okay? King James says you will be like a god. Or it maybe even says the gods, knowing good and evil.
So is that word Elohim?
It's the word
That's
Elohim,
Elohim, okay.
by itself. So
Which in my charismatic upbringing,
yeah,
which I say charismatic to describe
where you're coming
minimal theological,
Okay.
systematic
from.
theology. right?
Yeah.
So we want to understand the scripture as we see the entire story of it, but we're not creating a systematic. That's pretty rare.
That's right.
Okay, so those kind of verses of the Elohim was always interpreted to mean the Trinity. It's an early reflection of the 3 in 1.
The let us make man in our image.
Correct.
Yes.
But I've
so
come
that's
to
tied.
I've come to think more along the lines of what you're saying.
Yes, that he is speaking as the leader of the divine council, and in all probability, because it's a little murky, and we don't want to get into this too much, but the divine council is an ancient Near East way of doing business, and it's a perspective on kings and their role to their people. And so the kings had a council, and it was made up of family members, and they were the council to help the king govern the land, the people.
Well, we really see it in the book of Job,
That's right.
right? Where God's holding counsel and there are beings, some of whom,
right.
one of whom is Satan himself.
Well, actually,
The Satan.
Yes.
Okay, get into
I
it,
do
get
think
into
it's more accurate to say the Satan.
Yeah.
Which, if we want to take the whole periscoping idea, the serpent that shows up in the garden, I believe, is the same serpent that is in Revelation, that devil, the dragon,
Yeah.
right? But he is not yet named in particularity in Genesis. He's just a serpent, more crafty than all the other beasts.
Now, I heard somebody say that Satan is never named, that every
he is.
description of him is a title or a descriptor, but not a name in particular. That even Lucifer is the description.
Yeah, that
Although,
could be, but
Of the Satanists I've ever known, they do like Lucifer the best.
I'm out of the Satanists I've ever known.
Yeah,
How many are
Luciferians.
theirs?
A handful.
Okay.
So when I teach, like in teenagers, like in public school or thereabouts, we talk about spiritual health among their social skills, and we don't get specific.
Yeah.
but we want them to think that there's a deeper place.
Yeah, more.
Well, the kids who are Wiccan or Luciferian or whatever, they love.
Is that what they
for
prefer,
that to come up.
Luciferian?
That's the one I've heard the most.
Interesting.
So the Wiccans will say we're not Satanists, right?
Yeah,
And
so
then
I don't know
the
about-
Satanists will say we are Satanists. Yeah, they want to know the difference. Yeah.
I don't know about a name, never having a name, only descriptors, only because there is no Old Testament name that's not a descriptor. Moses means to
that's
pull
true.
out of the water.
Right,
So they just didn't do names the way we do.
right.
So, but in any case, the Satan in Job,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, is a title of a council member. And it's the adversary. It was a council that was in all ancient Near East kingships.
Well, so it makes me think if you were in court, you have a judge, but before the judge is the prosecutor
That's right.
and the defendant.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the counselor or the Satan in the ancient Near East, his role on the council was to question things, to
Yeah.
poke at things.
I used to do this
In order-
when I taught.
Yeah.
So when I was
that's
when I was
right.
teaching middle school,
It's called playing the
the devil's
devil's advocate.
Yeah. But when I would teach and assign group activities, I would give roles that every kid was assigned a role.
and you'd have a
And
challenger.
one of the roles was the skeptic.
Oh, this is like one of those teaching strategy things,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
did take a few education classes,
There
so
you
I
go.
can hang with you every fifth time.
So we had like the timekeeper,
Yes,
quality
right,
control,
right,
and,
right.
and one of them was
That's
the
right.
skeptic.
Yeah,
and I
the
said,
skeptic.
if everybody's doing the wrong thing and we all agree, then it's the skeptic's
So
fault and their
we're
responsibility.
probably
is to
reading
make
back
sure.
into Job.
Yeah,
Probably the better reading of Job to read it forward is at the time he was the skeptic, and the role that he did there, he was not necessarily practicing evil, or
Right.
the things he did in Job were not necessarily practicing evil. It was his job to challenge, and so that letting into the backroom conversation, so to speak, is probably poor theology for us to read back into it. Future satanic.
right. Well, but it does give us a picture of this idea, and this never dawned on me till maybe the last 5 years. This idea that the beings in the heavenly court.
Yeah.
I've always thought of angels almost like robots, where they're like sent on missions, but never do I consider like, oh, there's a diversity of personality and even created order
Or how
know-
about liberty to perform their jobs?
with their own judgments, their
That's
own
right.
opinions, their own
That's
preferences.
right.
And
This
so
is Psalm 82.
to start looking at and thinking about angelic beings or heavenly beings beyond just whatever the species is that's angel, right? Which
Yes.
which is
Angel
itself a job and not
subcategory. That's right.
so and then try to parse out, okay, like I was looking up the word cherub
Yes,
the other day,
yeah,
right? 'Cause
yeah.
from church, because
yeah.
the word cherub got mentioned, and I was
Yeah.
looking through the Bible.
It doesn't mean angels.
No, right?
I know.
But there were cherubs in the temple art.
Yeah.
Art on the walls,
Yeah, that's right.
right?
That's right.
And so I was like, okay, they have the wings. And then I was like, oh, but they have two faces, like the face of a lion going one direction and the face of
And
a
in
man
Ezekiel,
going
they
the
have
other
4.
direction. Right. And so it's like, okay, well, are those beings, or is it just a symbolism of a heavenly place? They also
Yeah.
have more wings in Ezekiel,
I know.
right?
Are you familiar with Dionysius, the nine circles, the 9 things?
No.
So this is pre-scholasticism, but it is certainly post.
Wait, what does pre-scholasticism mean?
Okay, the scholastics in medieval theology were very Aristotelian. They're very categorical. They
Okay.
divided and subdivided. If they did a sermon and they showed you their notes, it would be an uber outline, right? It's subpoints,
everything's
everything.
categorized
Oh man,
and-
to the max. There's great insight in it, but it also got off track a bit. Whereas the charismatic background, for example, not
Right.
systematic, but they want the spiritual oomph of things all the
It's
time.
always relational.
It's always relational. It's always a word of, this is the Lord saying this with power right now.
Yep.
And so like Elohim might not be in its systematic form and thought through, but it could be used at times with a specificity and a spiritual pointedness that at times is just God is in it. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
But then take it out of that moment and there's no understanding what it means.
Right.
Right. So those are like, in a sense, you could say called 2 extreme things.
Yeah.
So anyway, the Dionysius, he does 3 from the passage in Ephesians, he ends up doing 9. There's 3 classes of spiritual powers. And principalities is one, powers the other, angels is one. Angels are in the lowest category.
Okay.
Cherubim are up at the top and anyway, it's this old text about it's
Where do they
speculative,
draw
but-
evidence? It feels like they're just
Well,
arranging
it's
things
a
as-
little bit a lack of evidence, I would say, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But it also is very interesting when you read through it because he's presenting it with what he thinks is evidence, some of his rational thinking, and so you think, I've never really looked at Ephesians that way. There's power. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and rulers. And you have these words, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, maybe these could be classifications. Our age doesn't think of them that way.
Yeah. And so going to my upbringing, I've heard those words get defined with maybe too much certainty. The word strong man, Jesus
Yes.
says, if you're going to cast out
that's
a,
right.
right?
That's right.
And so there's
And
all of this
principality has a
dynamics.
geographic component, right?
That's the thing I think is there's a very regional, which harkens back to the Council of Gods and their
it does
assigned
count the
nations.
council, and even in Israel's day, without knowing about the council. So Baal, for example, we think of Baal in our circles of just a word for the bad guy of an idol, idolic
right.
worship. But that's not what Baal means. It's really a Semitic word that has to do with leader. That's really what its name is, leader. So that a Baal did turn into a false worship deity, but it was actually a ruler of a geographic area. So you had Baals that were different Baals in different regions.
Right.
So it's interesting. Anyway.
So I've heard people say that Baal is something like Lord.
Yeah, in a sense, yeah.
Yeah, or sire. you
Yeah.
know. And so maybe you can confirm this. I heard a scholar once say that Jesus was playing with words when he called Satan Beelzebub.
Beelzebub.
That originally it would be Beelzebul, or the Baal of Baals, the Lord of Lords, and he called him Lord of Flies as a derogatory, especially about these demons that he was swiping away like flies on.
Okay, so two
Would you say
responses.
that sounds
One,
accurate?
It might be over my head. What's the person? What was Tolkien? He was an etymologist, not etymologist. That's the plant. That's the animals. That's the insects.
That's entomologist.
Philologist. Is that words? Anyway,
I don't know.
That's A over my head. B, that's not my understanding from the little I have read. I thought Beelzebub was one of the principalities that was identified, and I don't know if it was in Jewish lore or not.
Okay.
By the way, when you said that earlier about having specific jobs and thinking about angels not as robots that were sent on a mission, but as creatures with a will and all that, does that connect to, because you mentioned in a recent conversation that you and I had about some of the Second Temple Judaism aspects of their perspective on the angels, like bringing farming. These angels technology were other angels, and so that they were given as, so the Old Testament Jewish idea is that they were given as gifts by God to facilitate the development of man's rulership on the earth.
Okay.
And that they had and then what's the speculation is, because that much seems to be clear from Scripture. Psalm 82 seems to be a psalm against that the gods are not doing what God intended them to do.
Well, and yes, okay, so there's a couple things there. One is, as I begin to think, well, these angels, some of them came down and seemed to want our women.
Yes,
which
Genesis
means
6.
There must be some species similarity such that there can be offspring,
that's
right?
a
So
great
there's
question.
a DNA situation there that they can't be that different, right? Like a coyote versus a wolf.
I probably wouldn't fall in that one as much as I would fall in that they are spirits without bodies, but they have within their powers the ability to take to themselves a body, and it's a real body.
Right. Well,
But I don't think that their ontology is flesh and blood like you and I are.
Okay.
I think they were made ontologically as their being as spirit or like
so,
wind.
However that works, repeatedly they can be mistaken for humans.
That's right.
Right? Throughout
That's
the Bible,
right.
even in the New
and
Testament.
real. It's not an appearance.
Correct. And they're eating.
And they're eating
Yeah.
and possibly having children.
And you might take, practice hospitality for you might be entertaining angels.
And you had no idea.
Right. Okay. So that's one. The other thing is that perhaps it could be that, or I really began to get depth when I thought, well, what about people that we choose to go our own way all the time? And why would it not be that the angels are that way too?
Okay,
They've given
this
this
is
message,
interesting.
and some of them say, you know what, I'm going to do this my way.
These are not in any of our notes, this conversation. So I have, as I've told you before, I'm working on a book called what's the name of the book? The War of God, the Long War of God, the Long War of God.
Okay.
And this subject is in it. And I did not realize I thought certain things. I didn't even know I thought until I started thinking about it. I thought that all the angels fell at once, for example.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I thought the angels were, one day they were good and the next day they were evil.
Right.
And I began to reflect on it, thinking, that's really unlikely. What is more likely, and then the potentials began to spread out before my mind's eye, is that we know a little bit about Lucifer, right? He desires, there's this description in Ezekiel 14, to be like the Most High. We see this picture in the garden. We learn from the later part of the story that that really is Satan at work there.
Right.
It's unclear what it means that it's a snake as a creature and he goes on legs, not legs afterwards. The imagery is difficult, but that's a prototype in some way, that Satan was involved and he later really becomes the dragon in a sense.
Right. Yeah.
So let's start with him. He falls. He goes into sin, and maybe we have some idea of that. Does that mean that a third of the angels, which we think at the end, are joined with him? Does that mean they joined him all in that same day? Or could it have been a process?
Right.
And if it was a process, then was there a process of temptation? Did he start with himself and then move on to who he thought he could persuade next of the angelic beings?
Right, right.
Found something, he created a grievance. He created a grievance with Eve. He created something, and I think it's preferable to view Adam and Eve as created with whatever bodies they had, but not, it'd be better to think of them like a teenager in the sense that they're married and can have children, but they are undeveloped and matured as yet.
Right.
There's an element of innocence. Even the idea of naked and ashamed. You know the Genesis 3 where they fall? It never says they were ashamed. It does not use that word one time in Genesis 3.
What does it say?
It just says that they saw that they were naked and they sewed clothes and then they hid.
Right.
And they said they're afraid.
Yeah.
Now the shame is implied there, I think, but it doesn't say it. Where that really comes from is the end of 2.
Oh, it says they were naked and unashamed.
Unashamed.
Okay.
And that got me thinking the other day, you know who that is little children.
Right.
A toddler running around, 2-year-old.
Yeah.
He's naked and he has no shame. Why? He doesn't know he's naked in the way we're saying it.
Right. Yeah.
He has no idea. And so I think it's good to think of Adam and Eve in a sense as they're full physical beings, I think, but they're infants in a sense, in a way, as adults. So they are deceived by the devil. They're tricked, right? And but anyway,
so I'm going to go back to that second temple mention that you had.
Yeah.
That these angelic beings were given the responsibility. How did you describe it? To bring technology to help the
mankind, to oversee it.
Okay, so I'm watching this Netflix documentary that a bunch of people have been talking about.
Which one?
Ancient Apocalypse.
Oh, I've seen it.
Okay.
I watched the whole thing.
So he's saying there's all these stories
I know.
from all over the world.
I know. Of these
of
beings
this mythology, these beings who come after the flood.
Yeah.
And say, we're going to help you rebuild. And they bring technology. And many, many times they're referred to as giants.
I know.
And it was so funny. I'm watching this documentary. And
he's not a believer. He's not a Christian.
No, he said he got the idea for it while he was on ayahuasca or something.
Yeah.
He's visiting
I thought he was
these
going to
spirits.
go to aliens. I thought he was going to do aliens from outer space, but he never ended up there either.
Oh, I could take it there too. But
he doesn't.
But he makes this point to say, not that I believe in giants, right? But that there were giants in their intellect.
I know. I heard when he did that. I
like,
thought that was funny too, because he totally explained away, and his whole show is kind of about not explaining away stuff, right?
Right.
And that here he did it right there.
Well, because he can't go
that.
too far. People think you're like a Bible thumper.
They already think he's crazy.
Yeah.
But yes, that's interesting, isn't it? So
let me add a little twist, right? Because you mentioned aliens. If what we think of as flying saucers or ships or beings coming out of them, if that were to happen in the time of Noah, wouldn't they say angels came down? Wouldn't they say that,
Well, okay, so if you go to Ezekiel and read it and think UFO.
Oh, like the wheel.
Wheels spinning within wheels.
Yeah.
And you have linear movements.
Oh yeah,
Big
it goes
squares.
always to the east and the west, and the wheel always traveled with
That
the
has
spirit.
a comparison to what has been reported, right?
Sure.
So you and I have talked a little bit about this, and I think we should move on here
Yeah.
and not get caught too much. But interdimensionality, and we'll have to have a show where we commit time to this as a subject.
Okay, all right.
Because not only one is it interesting, number two, I was wondering as we've been sitting here talking about why is it interesting? Why am I interested? Why have you gotten a little interested? And it gets back to something we did talk about the other day about the role of spirits behind what's taking place.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it's partly the reason it's interesting is just because it has been, even for Christians,
Yeah.
an unexplored topic. We've
Well-
kind of bought in with the atmosphere, and we are a materialistic.
Here's
viewing
the
church.
thought I've had, and I heard someone describing this, and it rang so true to me, is that there's more and more. Even the government is putting out footage of these unexplainable crafts.
Yes.
We don't know if there's beings inside of them, right? And drone technology is far beyond what we, I'm sure, can think is real. But being that as it may, the idea that a saucer is going to land and people are going to step out seems like we're being primed for this, so that we don't freak out and buy all the toilet paper.
Yeah.
So, what somebody was saying, and it rang really true for me, was how are the Christians going to respond, who've taken on this almost deistic view that God did miracles sometime in the past, but most of spirituality is just you read about it in stories. Whereas if we're reading the Bible to understand today and seeing that this spirit world is active and real now, that when the craft arrives, we'll think, oh yeah, of course that did.
Okay, so wait, let me ask you a question then.
So how many people would fall away or be tempted or think, oh, maybe all my Bible is wrong?
I just want to make sure I'm hearing what you're saying. You're saying, what if aliens and beings happened? Then what would the church response be, and have they set themselves up?
How many
for a
people
failure?
would be caught flat-footed?
Yes. Yeah.
By some being saying, well, we're interdimensional travelers and we've come to show you the way. Just
Yeah,
like we
a lot
did
would.
10,000 years
A lot
ago.
would. But you know what? A lot got caught flat-footed with COVID. Because here's what my experience is, as I've asked pastors over the last couple of years, I had a speculation. I wanted to see if it was going to be true. I began to ask them how many people have come back to church.
Very little, right?
My guess, and the couple pastors I've had that gave me their best guess on a percentage is a third of the people haven't been back.
Right.
Which is exactly what I kind of guessed.
I saw national statistics saying roughly that, 40% even.
Really?
Yeah, the total church attendance is down.
40%. Okay.
I may remember that wrong, but something.
Well, so and that may be my inclination would be that the liberal churches would suffer a greater one because they're there for even more social reasons, and I think the evangelical churches there are for more Bible reasons, let's say.
But if your church attendance is a consumer mindset of what does this church have to offer me, to me, I feel like those people are the most vulnerable.
I agree. So I think in that where that has been prevalent in evangelical circles, I think people just don't go again. They don't. They went 2 years not going and figured, why do I need to return? I don't want to. They weren't really there necessarily for Jesus and being with his people.
Well, and so here's the other side of that.
And I'm just saying, if they can get derailed by that.
Like the amount of social anxiety that has increased feels off the charts.
Yeah.
And church, they make you shake hands with random people around you.
That's my least favorite too.
Well, there have been times when it was mine. I just love going to church. I love, like, at our church, I love seeing the people who are there, right?
Yeah.
And so when I'm at a church with a bunch of people that I don't know that well, it's weird and awkward.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying derailed. I think it would derail. But you know what will happen is the church adapts.
Well, it'll be a test.
I mean,
right?
Galileo is thrown in jail for his assertion as a churchman that the earth is not the center, the sun is.
Yeah.
And he ends up recanting because he's threatened to be executed for heresy. But in his private journals, which we have now, they didn't have then, he says, I don't recant. From a science perspective, this is what Kepler did, and there's other guys that it was just too plain to him, right?
Yeah.
The church took over 100 years to adjust their position on that. Over 100 years.
And their position was mainly from Aristotle, isn't that right?
Well, no, I would say, okay, there may be philosophical roots to it, but I would say just from a biblical perspective, let's say the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. I mean, that's a verse used.
Yeah.
Well, the earth obviously is the center. We don't go around the sun. The sun is going around us. Look, it says in plain scripture, It rises and sets. That means we're here and it's there and coming up over our head and setting out behind us. And so the visuality of it lent itself to saying this is the only way to rationally interpret Scripture.
Right.
But it isn't the only way.
Well, and that opens a huge question, because how metaphorical do we take tons of things in the Scripture?
That's exactly right. It's
Now you're
exactly
in
what
6
it does.
days versus 6
That's right.
eons versus...
And it's not the only issue like that. The science of the Bible is a dome on pillars with an ether layer above. This is what they believed the world was, and that's not what we believe today.
See, like I heard I listened to a podcast where the pastor was going through, does the Bible promote a flat Earth? Right?
Yeah.
And he very clearly showed that it does not.
Oh, I think it does completely.
And what he did is he went into the context of every time where it talks about the 4 corners, or the, and he shows that he's not talking about 4 literal corners, and that even in the context, if you read each passage in context, it shows, you can see that he's not being literal.
So I don't agree with that personally. I think the authors did write that. It was the worldview at the time, and when we read it differently, we're importing our sensibility of what we have seen and known about around Earth and the sun.
I'm going to challenge you,
and
because
we're
I want you to
putting
listen
it into
to it.
that. Yeah, I'd be willing to.
He was
Yeah.
looking at each. He said, "Let's go through passage by passage."
Yeah.
And let's read it in context
Yeah.
and see what it says. And
Yeah.
I was,
because it's a universal belief. When the scriptures were written, nobody believed that the Earth was round.
well, you say when the scriptures are written, it's not
Yeah.
as if it was written all at once.
Well, I know there was the first theories of a round Earth were in the 600 BC, something like that.
Right. So I'm saying,
first
you've got the whole
philosopher.
New Testament.
But yeah, but we're talking about the old.
But you're
New
saying the
Testament-
scriptures. That's why
Okay.
I was challenging
Yes,
that.
the Old Testament has, in my opinion, is a flat Earth. It is, by the way, I think picked up in Philippians, not necessarily the flatness, but the 3-tiered. When Paul says every knee shall bow and every tongue confess above, on the earth and below the earth. That's the 3-tiered worldview of the ancient Near East.
Yeah.
And it is still in Paul, but there were people who didn't believe it at Paul's time also. That had begun to be abandoned.
Well, even if they're using the word, Hades for hell, they're
Yeah.
using a Greek mythological.
Yes.
They're borrowing definitions, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But
So-
what his point was not that people in the Old Testament believed in a round earth. That's not what he was saying. What he was saying is, if you read the Bible in context, it's not telling you the world is flat.
So this is the argument. I think what you're saying he is, and I've run into this, and I don't agree with it. It is that the human author may have written something, but the Holy Spirit was in charge in such a way that when the human author wrote it, when the science changed, it could be perceived then with the new science to be as true, and in a sense pulled one over on the original author because he used language he didn't know could sustain the truth as it changed scientifically. So that the Holy Spirit spoke the truth no matter what age wrote the smallest seed is a grain of mustard or whatever, or the 4 corners, or the windows of heaven release hail. So I don't buy that argument.
So you think they literally thought there were windows?
Yes. I think the whole ancient Near East, that's what was their perspective on.
And so how would we confirm that? Like, if we were going to go and
you can find it in
research
other literature.
that they're
It's in
going to...
lots of them. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll tell you a great little commentary on Genesis.
But
small
even in
one.
that other literature, it could be a turn of phrase, right?
Well, I
like
suppose
raining
that's-
cats and dogs. Do you know what I'm saying?
idioms.
Yeah.
Yeah. So idioms in ancient Near East languages are way out of my field.
Right.
They're out of my field in Greek, and I
Well, I'm
can
not
handle
claiming.
myself in Greek.
I'm just asking.
Yeah. So, but the scholars that look at it think they know what an idiom is and what an idiom isn't in Semitic languages. And none of that stuff is idioms in their perspective.
Interesting.
The best little commentary that's an easy read is called "At First We Misunderstood." At first, in the beginning, we misunderstood. I think maybe that's what it is. I don't remember now exactly, but it's an author guy, and he writes a commentary, and he shows really when Moses writes, right, when there's revelation given, and Moses writes the Genesis through Deuteronomy, whether he wrote Deuteronomy or not. when he writes it, what he's transcending is three really root cultures. His people are coming into the land of Canaan. And so he's writing in a context of where they're going and the belief system of Canaan. Makes sense. They've also spent 400 years in Egypt. 400 years. That's more than our countries existed.
And he's trained.
And
as
he's
an
trained
Egyptian.
there. So what he's writing for when he writes Genesis, let's just say we're talking about Genesis right now. He's writing in a context of the cosmology of Egypt.
Right.
And then one layer back, Babylon is the roots of the Semitic people before they went to Egypt.
Yeah.
And if they're going to hold to their ancestors, to Abraham and Isaac who came, then it's the Babylonian worldviews.
Right.
And so he tries to point out the three worldviews, what they thought, what their view was, and then when Genesis is written, and in his particular Genesis 1 and 2,
Right.
when Moses says such and such, here's the context against which he's not fighting this issue, but he's making a statement here. And that's what his belief is. And I agree with this, that this is the right way to interpret Genesis. You cannot, that Genesis is written with an accommodation to the worldview of the people of the time. And if there's 45 things that people believe that weren't right, God let 35 of them stay because he's interested in these 10.
Well, so here's the way I have been thinking about it, because this is actually something I was
Called accommodationism.
pondering just this week, is the idea that how many of the concepts like Hades of Mediterranean religious beliefs are borrowed or sifted into the biblical narrative. And I was listening, actually, I saw this clip of Ricky Gervais talking to, who's a well-known atheist, right?
Yeah.
Talking to Stephen Colbert, who's open about his Catholic faith. And he says, there's thousands of gods.
Who's saying this? Gervais?
Gervais.
Okay.
There's thousands of gods, and you, Catholic person, you don't believe in any of them save one.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so you just don't believe, you don't believe in 999. I just don't believe in 1,000. Right?
That's a funny point.
But what I thought is, no, we believe in all of those.
That's right.
That they exist, and that's where this council of gods
That's right.
and these gods
But
of all the nations.
this is not a common belief in the church. I remember.
But I just think it's not a commonly addressed issue that the Bible teaches. So what I'm saying from that is, we're not going around saying all the religions of the world are wrong in the sense that their gods don't exist, but rather that those gods will one day submit to the God.
Okay, that's what you and I are saying.
Correct.
But that's not the majority of people in church what they believe. They believe that those are called false gods and they don't really exist.
Don't exist, yeah.
I was asked that in a church once when I went and I was teaching on this, and a guy,
Is that
one of
because
the
they're
elders,
scared? If they exist, then maybe there's
I do
powers
think
out there
there's
that
some
we don't
fear in it.
understand.
I do think there's fear. It's way easier to have a black and white position that all that other stuff was false and wrong. And God calls it false. They are false gods.
Correct.
And there are places in Isaiah in particular where the gods are nothing. And so they say, well, see, these are not real. That's not what that means.
Yeah.
It's nothing by comparison to the Lord of the Lords or the...
Well, he's also making a point, and I don't know if this is the passage you're thinking of, where it's like, look, you have a carved piece of wood that you bow down to.
Yes.
The
This
wood
section.
is not a real
Yes,
God.
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
But the thing about the wood is, most of them didn't believe the wood necessarily was either, but they thought the wood was like the talisman through which you got access to the real being.
Well, and as I
They
say
were
that
a little
too,
more sophisticated.
He was mocking them at some level
that's
too,
right.
right?
He's
Use-
mocking them
Use
there.
half the wood to light your fire, and the
right.
other half
It's totally
to bow
mockery.
down to.
Yeah. So I think it is less common, and I do think your point is the exact right one. It's much better to see the religions of the world as being run by deities, lowercase d, gods, lowercase g, and they are errant to their original mission. They are off base. They're not doing what God asked them to do. And what they've taken to themselves in their fallenness is worship. Okay, let's do this. Let's switch gears. That
Actually-
was a whole... Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, let's take this moment. So one of the things we've been wanting to
Oh,
do
that's what I was just going to do.
is do recommendations, right? And
Yeah.
so we thought we'd start it off
you wanna
with
read it?
the Trinity School. Yeah, if you don't mind.
Go.
Okay, so this episode, we'd like to recommend the Trinity School here in Scio, Oregon. Trinity School is overhauling education using mold-breaking, research-supported methods to instill a traditional Christian mindset. We show children how to wrestle with modern ideas using biblical truth. Our teaching approach is fundamentally different from public schools as it puts parents in the driver's seat. We're transforming the idea of school in 4 big ways: the subject matter, the grading, the grade levels, and the schedules. So if you'd like more information, you can visit lukezedwick.com/Trinity School. This is an adventure we've been on. I say we, my family, in trying to start something new. So,
Okay, let's go to the LGBT without T. But before we do that, I want to just go back to your Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Jesus. I'm not sure if I heard your point on it, if we made it to your point, or if we just got caught in the background.
My point was just realizing
being offered
that Jesus could have conquered the world, and the sense that, okay, so let me point this way. So I was thinking, I think occasionally about greatness, right?
My theory is that every individual was born to be great. We are stymieing it by the fall. I believe every human person, greatness is in everyone.
So, but here's what I mean by greatness.
Okay.
I'm thinking more of like the famous
I do too.
in our culture.
Okay.
Right? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't mean it that way.
So there's a personality type I've noticed and we've talked about this before, that Michael Jordan documentary.
Yeah. The Last Dance.
How obsessed he was with being the best.
Winning,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And I know a few people that are like that they're driven in a way that normal people aren't, to the point where it feels almost unhealthy. Right?
Yeah.
And you see this whenever I've looked deeply into the lives of people who've been on a level of success above, everybody else.
Yeah.
That in the wake of those people's success is broken marriages.
Yeah, that's right.
Hurting children.
You step on people.
Especially, right? And then, and so this idea, though, then I concluded it must be that it's not right to do that. But now I'm starting to question it.
I know.
Right?
I
Because,
know.
so thinking about church a little bit, I know we've talked a lot about church today or about Christianity, but is there a place in a church where, for people who are driven like that, to say God wants you to push and not waste your potential, right?
I know.
But churches, in my experience, tend to promote into leadership people who are on the other side. It's all about relationship. It's all about taking the time and slow down.
Yeah.
Okay, so who's an example in the Bible? Even the temptation to say, oh, Jesus didn't fall for that. He could have conquered the world and he didn't, right?
Mm-hmm.
See how much he was chill.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think the Apostle Paul is actually the best example of someone who is unwavering in his obsession that I'm going to do everything.
Yeah.
I'm going to run in such a way as to win.
Sacrificed marriage.
Other people, So
that was his choice.
but he did it without.
He also trampled over Barnabas a little bit.
No, you're right. He was a very
So
driven
he
person.
probably made
He was
mistakes doing
probably
it.
overly pure in his determination
Yeah.
and willing to reject people for it.
Yeah.
But to say, therefore, we're better in our laziness. You know what I'm
Yes,
saying?
I do know exactly what you're saying.
Okay.
I went to a conference with a famous pastor, which I won't say any names, but it was down in California, and I went to this conference 3 years and spent a week down there. And I didn't really get to know him or anything like that, but it was a small group, and he taught, and etc. And I just watched him, and he's charismatic and likable and all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
But you could see some of the unlikableness too,
sure.
and the drivenness and what it meant, the schedule keeping. And I just thought, I don't want to do that. But I had to face the fact that I could feel very virtuous in that.
Virtuous in
rejecting
his driven
that
nature.
You're going to hurt people if you do this.
Yeah.
Because people, even we stayed at their house, they were hurt by him. I ended up ministering to people that stayed and went to his church that were elders, right?
Right.
And I think I did feel a little virtuous, but the further I reflected on it, I thought, you know what? I think there may be some truth to that, but there may be also, there's a different side of brokenness to me.
Yeah.
And where it gets back to, I think, is the illustration of the talents that are given by the master, 5, 3, and 1. And the one guy buries. And he is rebuked.
Right.
Actually, he's dragged away. I mean, the imagery is he's sent to hell,
Right.
basically. The other guys are promoted. But you know what? The guy who has 5 and who makes 5, there's no way that kind of ambition does make mistakes.
Sure.
It just does.
Well,
But
and just
Jesus
because someone is
affirmed-
hurt by your leadership doesn't mean you were leading incorrectly.
You're right.
Because
But
sometimes we're spoiled and
I
we want
agree.
things our way.
I agree.
Yeah.
But that also, I think they hurt people.
Yeah.
Ambitious people hurt people. But that is no argument for not being ambitious.
Right.
And I think you're completely right. It is easier to spiritualize. And you know what? It's easier to do that when you have a church of 100.
Well, so one of the things, one of the things,
It is.
yeah, no, it's true. One of the things I noticed in that documentary, going back to Michael Jordan, is how fondly the people who hated him when
Many
they
of
played against him or
Yeah.
with him,
Yes.
how fondly they looked back and said, we never would have been as good if it wasn't for
I
him.
know. There was another documentary that came out. Did you see it?
No.
Um,
And to be honest, I'm not a
Luke
sports.
List. Was it Luke List? Their big guy from Australia?
Okay.
Because he was overlooked and he,
Oh, they left him
Talked
out of the
about-
documentary?
well, he was mentioned, but not really. And he was offended by that. He made his own documentary about how much wrong Jordan did, how he mistreated people.
Yeah.
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 And so, yeah, I think you're right. People look back, but I also think, I mean, the reality is I think he hurt people tremendously.
Right. Well, and I think that's the model. I mean, if you look
Yeah.
through the NBA
Yeah.
at their coaches and at their top players, you're going to see
How about just high
a slew of
performance?
broken families.
Does it matter? Does it matter what
CEOs.
sport? Does it matter what industry?
No. Yeah, I think
So
it's the same.
when you're saying Jesus is, so get back to your thing here, Alexander the Great and Genghis Khan, what are you saying the difference is? Is that Jesus, is it just in the observation that a kingdom really literally was offered to him if he had wanted it?
That was my main observation,
That was
but
your main
then
one.
but pondering that idea of like, okay, what's the difference between an ambition to serve God in a way that leaves nothing undone
Yeah.
versus a selfish ambition
Yeah.
to be able to pridefully
I agree
say
with
I'm
you
the
about
best.
Paul. I agree with you on that. The other one I think about in those terms is always Esau. Not Esau, Jacob.
Okay.
Jacob is a striver.
Yeah.
And he's manipulative.
Right.
And God blesses him. And even after God sends him to Laban to be humbled,
Right.
God sends him to Laban for double the time to be humbled,
Right.
right? 2 sevens. Even when he goes and he meets Esau, you see in Jacob a humbled man. Partly is still maybe a little manipulative. Some people read his putting the livestock and his family and his children in front of him to be greeted as manipulative still. I don't read it that way.
I mean,
I read it as a cultural dynamic of humility. That's how I read that.
okay.
But he wrestles with God on the night before he meets Esau, his
Right.
brother. He wrestles with God and says, I will not let you go.
Yeah.
And he's seen God, and God, touches all that happens there.
Yeah.
I believe that that's a God-sanctioned zeal that in Jacob, God is ever working to refine his ambition, and he's always sliding into manipulation, into using people. And he has humbling circumstances. But that fundamentally his nature of striving, when turned towards the right things, God approves. God says, this is good. This is a good thing. And you can totally corrupt it,
Yeah.
but
yeah.
it's a good thing. So, okay, hey, let's do LGB without the T. What did you mean by that?
Okay. So the
Changing gears.
yeah, let's go to politics. Well, it's not really politics. It's
I know.
society, right?
Yeah.
So, everybody is aware, I think, that transgenderism is the topic du jour for everybody. And it's sort of the cutting edge of social change or the culture war. I remember the week after the Supreme Court made legal gay marriage.
Dobbs.
And at the time, I would listen to a lot of NPR whenever I was driving in the car. This is before I had nice headphones and I could just do podcasts. And I remember immediately
Nobody's
after...
hearing you say that it's okay to wear headphones when you drive in a car,
Oh,
right?
I don't know.
Nobody's hearing you say that.
Okay, they didn't hear. Okay. So I immediately that next week, every news article on society or on culture that they were doing was about transgenderism. And I remember like
Wait.
the
The
transition.
week after the Dobbs case?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
And
did
I was
not
like, oh,
catch
here we
that.
go. This is the next. Wow. This is the next forefront.
Ooh, that's
And
stunning.
this was years ago, 5-6 years ago. I don't know how long ago it
yeah,
was.
about that. Yeah.
Okay. So on we fight. And what we're seeing now is that, the transgenderism is aiming, the ideology is aiming at
You know what
kids.
this sounds like?
Okay.
Is when Christmas, the day after Christmas, they have Easter things up.
No,
Or
Valentine's Day.
Valentine's,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Or in March, they have shorts.
Well, it's like they're going down the checklist.
Yeah.
We got this one. Let's go to the next one.
That's right. Yeah.
And the plan, has been pretty straightforward.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
astounding.
So they're aiming for kids, right? That's the thing that we're seeing really clearly right now.
Yes.
But there's a growing number of, there's a growing Twitter handle called Gays Against Groomers.
Gays against groomers. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So groomer is the
Yeah.
pejorative that conservatives have come up with talking about weird people on TikTok or weird teachers who are trying to promote and propagate. And effectively, we're seeing that this transgender in particular seems to be really contagious among friend groups, that teenagers are really susceptible to this, especially teenagers who are struggling with social anxiety, and social anxiety is on the huge rise, especially after COVID, right? Okay, so what I've noticed then, and I even saw this post of like, okay, embrace tradition, like reject modernity, embrace tradition. This is something Christians have been playing with. So the Gays Against Groomers did it, and they said reject modernity, and it was the flag with all the, like the gay rights flag with all of the different symbols, too many to count, and it gets updated every year.
Yeah.
And then it said accept tradition, and tradition was just the rainbow flag, right? As if in the 90s, when it was just the nice gay couple next door who just wanted to be married, that was like the good old days for them. And they are pushing, there's a big part of the, what we've been told is a gay community or the LGBT community, although it's really just people. I don't know if there's town hall meetings for all the gays. I don't think so.
It sounds way better.
Yeah.
And it sounds like
But they're
it has
pushing
movement.
the T side of it out. And you're seeing a division among that.
Yeah.
Part of the reason I was thinking about is why is this one so much more controversial? Why is everybody standing up suddenly? Maybe it's the kids, right? The moms are getting involved now. But
Just saw a survey. Liberals and conservatives are angry when children are hiding their gendering.
the schools are hiding it. Yeah.
It doesn't matter on the spectrum. The
And that's
parents
happening.
are mad.
I mean, I have personal friends who've gone
Yeah.
through that, where the school separated their daughter from them
Yeah.
and promoted and supported her in transitioning.
Yeah.
And it was, it's evil. Okay. But here's the big ideological part. Okay. What generally got accepted, and I don't even hear Christians argue much against it, is that sexual orientation is sort of immutable characteristic. That if you're
Wait,
gay,
sexual orientation is an immutable characteristic.
yeah,
Okay.
if you're gay,
Okay.
you were born gay.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And is it genetic even?
Okay.
And that's always been the big question.
Yeah.
But if you're born that way, the argument goes that we as Christians should be much more accepting because they can't help it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But now that there's all this evidence that transgenderism is in fact contagious and is more akin to like anorexia or cutting or some of these other kind of social contagious mental illnesses, to me, it starts to question, well, maybe all of it is contagious. I mean, you hear, and I've heard many stories of young men questioning their sexuality, getting groomed, you would say,
Yeah.
by older gay men,
Yeah.
teaching them. And
Yeah.
then they weren't sure if they're gay until this 25, 30-year-old guy came along when I was 15.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I am gay.
Yeah.
Right?
Not when 25, not when 35, but 15,
15.
or 12 or
And
13.
my understanding is that's incredibly common. In
Yes.
fact, and this is part of the grooming question too, because the parents have been fighting schools over these books that are graphic depictions of sexual activity put into middle school and high school libraries.
Yeah.
And there's these curricula that these radical public school employees are promoting that teaches or trains middle and high schoolers on how to get onto the hookup apps that adult men use to have sex with strangers.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like this whole system is just building
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And the question is now, maybe it's going to, maybe this, we said in the 90s, oh, this is a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Once you say gays get married and it's the same
Yeah.
thing as marriage.
Yeah.
And everybody said, no, it's not. But now here we are
Yeah.
sliding down the slide.
So you said catchy and you said spreads. What'd you say?
Contagion.
Contagious.
Social contagion.
Social contagion.
Is
Now,
the-
so let me ask you this: transgenderism.
Yeah.
Do you believe that there are people, if it wasn't a front line and there wasn't grooming stuff taking place right now, do you believe that there would still be individuals, though less common, but still individuals who would be struggling with that? With, I feel I'm a boy, I feel, or I've always
yeah.
wanted to be a girl.
For sure.
that there's always been some people like that,
Sure.
right? And I think Bruce Jenner is a great example of that. Societally, it's changed.
I don't know, great, but
Well, I don't mean it that way, but he says, and it seems to be an honest statement, that he struggled with it in his entire life. In fact, it motivated the decathlon was really about that.
right, proven as a man.
Yep, proven
Yeah.
as a man.
Yeah.
So I've often thought, I agree with you about the contagious element, but I also think that doesn't undo the fact that there are individuals who would have struggled with this and would, even if the contagious element were taken away.
Right.
I think the same thing about gay too,
Yeah.
because when I was in school, I think it was not, this is pre-90s, and it was not an accepted, socially done thing. Nobody thought about it. But that didn't mean that I can look back and say, oh, I wonder if that person struggled with this way.
Right. Yeah.
But I didn't even think about it at the time. Nobody did.
Yeah.
Then when my kids have gone to high school, it's like a fad thing, man.
Oh yeah.
To be gay that's too far to say a fad thing. But there is a cool factor to it.
I was talking to a Christian dad whose daughter goes to public school in Portland. He said she's fourth grade. She's the only girl in her class who just says, "No, I'm just a girl."
Yeah.
The only one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody's
Yeah.
questioning or bi or
And so
pan
as a parent, one of the ways I remember sitting down with my 3 boys and having conversation, all 3 at once, so that nobody would feel uncomfortable. And I wasn't saying anything about any of them individually, but I wanted to make a statement about normal boy feelings, normal male feelings.
Yeah.
So what I said was something along these lines, because I grew up, let's say, playing baseball, and you slap them on the butt, you're running in from third base into the dugout. Nice play, you hit him on the butt. But that's not what it meant today. It didn't mean anything then.
Right.
It's just a part of male affection. And here was what my point was, is it would be easy to get lost. You can lose all male affections that are healthy because you would
As a reaction.
Because they would be then retranslated as, this must mean I'm gay.
Yeah.
And what that does, it assaults the element of, if you have a friend who's a guy and you feel affection, I don't know why about baseball, but the slap on the butt is just, you don't even think about it. It's just second nature.
Yeah.
And it's actually in a lot of sports.
Well, so here's an interesting.
But wait, let me
yeah.
do this thing. And that is the feelings that go with it. How do you have friends that are, let's say I'm a guy and I have a friend who's a guy and we're in high school or whatever, and we enjoy something and I look at and we're laughing together and I feel warmth towards him.
Right.
I feel affection towards him. Am I now supposed to think, am I gay?
Maybe I'm gay.
Maybe I'm gay.
Right.
Because I never had that thought once growing up. But now I believe, as teenage kids, there's an insecure time. You don't know what's going on, even in the best scenarios.
Well, and
so I
you've got
wanted them to
someone
know.
there to say, maybe you are, right?
A lot of people
someone
to
at
say
school,
that.
a
That's
friend,
right.
a teacher.
That's right. So what I tried to do was say, this is normal. This is okay.
Yeah.
And my kids, I'm not trying to talk about my kids, but I'm just talking about, in a sense, kids. It was a good, uncomfortable, but good conversation. But I believe all ears were listening.
Right.
Not necessarily that they wanted to jump in and have a...
There are these fatherly moments where this matters.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Something I've noticed in my
Well,
travels.
my point was going to be that gay today is, I think it's catchy too.
No, I
Maybe
think so
not,
too.
or contagious.
Yeah.
It reproduces itself.
Well, from a
in
biblical perspective, it always was. Right? Be
Yes.
careful when you're pulling someone out of sin that you yourself don't fall
That's
into
right.
it.
That's right.
Here's something I've noticed in South America and Africa, both places where homosexuality is basically, if it exists, it's not in public, right?
Yes.
Is that men are way more openly affectionate.
Isn't that
holding
interesting?
hands,
Yeah.
walking
That's right.
arm in arm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but in no way are they sexualizing anything.
Yeah, that's right.
And if you ask them about it, it would shock them.
Yeah.
And so to me, that supports what you're saying, which
I
is
agree.
that the reaction of men, maybe even subconsciously, when presented with the normalization of homosexuality, is to
Shrink away.
pull back from physical affection
I
that
agree.
would be healthy,
That would be healthy.
but now it's off limits.
So it's costing us all.
Is there maybe I've got other thoughts too, because I think a lot about Christian, or not Christian culture, but American culture, and how it was affected by World War II, and sort of the
thought a lot about
brokenness
that
of
too.
men coming back from 2 wars in a row, and coming back and the brokenness and the heartbreak and pushing it all down and how it began to break apart families. But we're
Have we
at
talked
an
about
hour and
this?
10.
Okay,
Yeah.
we need to do. Have we talked about this before though?
No.
World War II,
No.
like that?
I
Because
think,
that's literally the same thought I've had.
oh yeah.
Is that you had a massive war that was non-processed for the trauma of it.
Yeah.
It's
And they were told, don't talk
tragic.
about it when
Yeah.
you get back.
And
No one wants
if
to hear about your
It's their kids that go into the 60s and cast off what was pushed for a decade, an American dream. And it was a burgeoning dream. The 50s
Well, and not only that,
are like the greatest.
but they not only came back with their broken hearts of having committed horrible things, that
Yeah.
war requires.
Yeah, yeah,
But then they were sold this idea that we're all going to get rich.
I know. Well, they
And
did
so
grow greatly.
chasing money
Yes.
instead of dealing with your broken heart.
And their kid says,
Is a
"Is
recipe
that
for
all
disaster."
you got to offer?
Yeah.
This is an empty life. A
Right.
martini at 4 every day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then that's when the picture of motherhood gets broken to a severe degree as
The
well.
whole thing. My theory is that that's our big fracturing moment as a
Yeah.
nation. It's been 50 years in the making, but yeah.
Yep.
Well, we never got to Garden of Eden, huh? We'll have to do it another time.
Oh, yeah.
We barely got to we really got caught up with the role of the place of the powers.
The place of the powers.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Okay, we'll wrap it up.
Yeah. This is On Second Thought. If you're still watching, we really appreciate it. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Google Music, I don't know if we're working on Google Music. I never did figure that out. YouTube or other places. We appreciate shares and likes and subscribes and all that. We're going to keep doing this until someone makes us stop. We'll see you next time.